All right, I'll go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum of 7 members present. And I would also like to say that we have Amanda Green, who won her election. Congratulations.
Welcome.
On the front row. Based on the timing, we actually can't canvass the election until tomorrow, which we will do at noon. Yeah?
Yes.
And she also has her husband, Keely Green, with her. So welcome. And with that, we will go to C1, consideration, discussion, possible action related to 2019-2020 school calendar development process. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. I like to say this time of year when the weather turns cold, our thoughts turn to the school calendar, and it's really turned cold today. But nevertheless, it is time for us to consider just the process that we intend upon using, get some feedback from the Board of Trustees in regards to the process that we have for developing the 2019-2020 school calendar. As the Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Trammell gets to oversee that process. We're happy to have Dr. Trammell with us to kind of talk a little bit about what we'd like to do and then get any feedback that you might have for us as we go through the process for developing this calendar. With that, Dr. Trammell.
Good evening. We'd like to get your input on any adjustments or comments that you have on the process for the 2019-20 school calendar. DEIC was given an overview of the parameters, including our District of Innovation parameters that we want to take advantage of at the October meeting, and I've linked that presentation under parameters. This month, we would like to get input from DEIC on a couple of calendars that we've just kind of worked up. They may totally ditch those and create something on their own, or they may modify those. So we would anticipate having 2 calendars at least for the community to look at and give input on. We would post those calendars after DEIC meets to get feedback from the community, and educators on the DEIC committee will take those to campuses and get input from the stakeholders at the campus level as well. Then we would anticipate DEIC looking at all of that input at our January meeting, and then potentially bringing that to the board to consider the calendar or calendars recommended, depending on how many there ends up being, by the DEIC, and then hopefully to vote on that calendar either in January or February, but hopefully for sure by February, depending on if you give us any additional work to do or change it up.
So very possibly
So,
we could be voting though on it in
We
January.
could be voting on it in January. So with that, do you have any preferred adjustments or questions about the calendar?
I would say one of the things that we know in going through this process with this board in the past several years is the importance of ending the first semester by the end of the fall before we go into the Christmas break and trying to make sure that we end before we're going into June. I know those have been deeply held beliefs in this community. Obviously, our tie with Texas A&M University makes that a reality in this community. Things change on a semester by semester basis for a lot of families, and so finishing that up before the summer begins and finishing the fall semester before the winter break is important. And so those are things that we will certainly be bringing back to you in any type of options that we have before you or before the community. But we'd love to know if there's anything else you want us to consider.
So that's when you say parameters, those things.
Yes, sir.
The other
Right,
one was
and just,
Memorial Day, but a lot of times we have to deal with that.
Right, and this year in particular, just kind of a heads up, STAR testing does not conclude until the 22nd of May, and Memorial Day is on the 25th of May. So what that means is we have to make a decision as a district. Do we want to have the children testing the last week of school with the makeup day being on that Friday, the 22nd, or do we want to not have that the last week of school and come a few days the next week? So that is something that DEIC will discuss and deliberate about before we bring a recommendation to you all.
I think it would be appropriate that Ms. Barrett come up with some suggestions that might not be popular. So,
Really? This is how we're going to end this? I just was going to say, though, we won't have an opening of a new school, so we'll really get to be able to use the School of Innovation process a little bit that we had to work around this year. And that's exciting, too. And I don't know if you've heard it in the community, but I certainly have. Everybody's very excited about the week at Thanksgiving. I've heard that more than I can even count on two hands.
Wow,
People who
that's
are
great.
excited about
Family
having
time and-
family time and being able to do that. And I may have seen a few teachers as well that thought that was a great idea. So,
It's great. Do the best we can.
I know, right?
Yeah. And I know our two DEIC reps will help with that process. Yeah. Okay.
Surprise you.
So,
Oh, I
With-
just have one more question. No, is
Although
this,
technically, the election will have been canvassed at noon, so
She serves through
she serves through December no
December
matter what.
18th.
All right, well, I'll expect to see
At
you
about
tomorrow
7:07
then at
p.m.
4 o'clock, 4:10,
410.
4:10.
Got that in my calendar.
somewhere around
Right
there.
here.
so is this always the process and the timeline for doing the calendar for the following year?
So this is, it's roughly, this is what we have done in years past. We've gone either in January or February for ultimate recommendation to the Board of Trustees. We've done the online participation by our various constituents, sometimes in the November to December range, sometimes December to over the holiday break range as well. So that's kind of vacillated back and forth. Since we've moved to November elections and the specter of having new board members come on the process, we've had to back it up a little bit. In past years, we maybe started it earlier in October, but we're now moving that back to November because we didn't want, one board starting it with another board finishing it. So that's why you really see us in earnest in November, kind of start this process up.
Okay, because I just had someone ask me today, they haven't asked me today, if the calendar was ever set earlier than this, because they're a working parent and they would appreciate, especially things like a full week off at Thanksgiving,
sure.
knowing even more in advance.
Right.
So I was just curious.
I
It
think,
makes perfect sense.
yeah, I think we can get our work done by January unless there's just something that the board would send us back to gather more information on.
Okay.
I will say too, another point is A&M doesn't really release when they'll have spring break. But I've been collaborating with Brian, who has some information, and they feel fairly confident that the spring break will be the week of March the 9th. And so there's all these pieces that kind of go into that.
And one thing that I would add, and it's the impact of that district of innovation with the flexibility it gives us, the ability to have the discussion center on what actually makes sense for educating kids has really been a good thing. And previously, we were really, so pigeonholed in what we could do. You could really, it was a changing one day or two, maybe. Whereas now we have some flexibility and they can do things like actually consider, well, when is a good time to have a break? So that's really been a helpful thing. So thank you again for
Right.
that.
You bet.
I guess I want to point out for the board too, just as we're going into this, bearing in mind that all of this could change tomorrow afternoon when DEIC looks at some of the options. But one of the things the administration wants to consider is having a couple of planning days back to back at strategic times throughout the year, kind of going to what Mr. Harris was talking about, so that we can have both district and campus planning days for our teachers at strategic times at the elementaries at the beginning of the second 9 weeks and the beginning of the second semester or the fourth 6 weeks for our secondary folks. And then again in February so that we can do the things that we need to implement our curricular changes that we're having, give teachers the amount of planning time they need in their departments and in their grade levels so that we can be able to use the time that we have allotted through the calendar process and not having to provide days for planning, provide subs and those types of things to get those things done, and having teachers out of the classroom. So it may look a little different. You may see some Monday, Tuesdays that we haven't put forward before, but I think that would be the District of Innovation does unlock that opportunity for us to start a little earlier and put those days in the school year that would be more advantageous not only for our teachers but for our students. And so we look forward to bringing some options that contemplate that forward.
So, and that was it. Do you all have any recommendations or suggestions for us on this, or? Hopefully, we will have a proposed calendar in January, and if you feel comfortable, you all can vote. Otherwise, it will be February.
Okay. Any other input? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Takes us to C2, receive report on bilingual ESL programs annual report. Dr. Ely.
Mr. President, members of the board, I'm joined at the table, or we are joined at the table by Dr. Marla Ramirez, who will be giving us a report on bilingual ESL programs. And this is an annual report that has it's chock full of data about how our students whose first language is not English, how they are both learning and acquiring their English skills and performing in state mandated assessments. So this is an annual report with a lot of data in here, and so we're excited to have Dr. Ramirez here to share some of this information with us. Dr. Ramirez.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here this evening. Okay. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the program scope, the budget, the staffing, and then just where we are in our performance and in the different goals and activities that we have for our program. So our program scope, our model is for our young pre-K Head Start students. We have dual language, which is 90% of the time their instruction is in Spanish. And then our dual language program for our K through 6, where 50% of the time is dual language or Spanish. So 50% English, 50% Spanish. Then for our English language learners, our ESL students that their primary language is not Spanish, we have ESL content-based and pull-out support. So our content-based model basically is taught by ESL certified teachers. And some of them will be in the ESL setting with an ESL specialist, but the majority of them are with ESL certified teachers in their regular classroom. We do have a pull-out model for a lot of our secondary students where their ELA teacher is certified ESL, or they're also pulled out with specialist support. Oops. Yeah. Right now, we have, compared to last year, we had 64 languages reported last year. For CSISD this year, we have 61 reported languages other than English in our district.
And just a reminder, that's languages that are spoken in the home by College Station ISD families. 60, I think that is, I just would like to pause there. I think it's amazing that we have 61 different languages spoken in the homes of College Station ISD families, and it just speaks to the diversity of this community.
Definitely. We have a home language survey that's required when you enter a Texas public school to fill out, and they've indicated something other than English. So our count is 61 at this time. So last year, out of the 61 languages spoken, 667 of those were native Spanish speakers out of the 1,137 ESL students we had at this time. Right now, at the same time, we have 1,123 ESL students, so that means that they're limited English proficient. 699 of them are native Spanish speakers out of that count. And the reason I point that out is because of the dual language program. That's the difference between our ESL and dual language program. So we're required to look at or considering a special language program, and I thought this was really important information here because the reason we have the dual language Spanish program is because we have over 20 LEP or limited English proficient students in a particular grade level. So every year I'm required to run the numbers based on language, and the ones who are they're getting closer to that 20 count per grade limited English proficient. Right now, this year was Mandarin. Next is Korean and then Arabic. We're not at 20 limited English proficient in a given grade level, but we're getting close. So when I say close, like in first grade, for instance, we had 24 students that on their home language survey put Mandarin. But then I go back and check, and 9 were limited English proficient. But those numbers are getting larger, reporting something other than English, but I have to monitor the limited English proficient. So just to keep this in mind, these are the top 3 after Spanish that are coming in.
With question.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's across, just to clarify, that's across the whole district?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So we take the data of all the schools, so all the first grade, all the kinder, every grade gets pulled together. Great question.
Clarify. So there's 61 different reported languages.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
For somebody that's ignorant on this, how many languages are there?
Right.
No, I'm somewhat being funny, but
I don't know how many
same
ultimate languages and people groups there
I would
are.
have never
but-
realized
don't-
there had been that many.
I don't know, but they're here. we do have a list. So the TEA gives us a coding system, and they say, here's the code for this language, this language. So then when the parents fill out their home language survey, so what I believe, it's different dialects within certain languages. We do see that. So there are different, within the Mandarin language, there's different dialects within, so that's where I think, like Spanish, Portuguese, all the different dialects of all the different languages. I know, it's incredible. So when we look at our budget, from last year to this year, you can tell that the majority of our bilingual ESL budget is local. And it's almost double of what the state allots. So the big difference from last year to this year was mainly our local budget grew by about about $150,000, where the state allotment only grew by like $5,000. So the state allotment will continue to adjust a little bit before the end of the year, but not much. So our budget grew from last year to this year approximately $160,000, with the majority of that being local funds. So our staffing for right now, we have 3 bilingual certified reading specialists that serve our program, our bilingual programs at our 3 elementaries. We have 34 bilingual certified teachers, but we are still looking for 3 bilingual certified teachers today. So we're keeping an eye on those resumes, those applications, making contact with soon to graduate bilingual candidates. 22 bilingual teaching assistants that assist in our programs, 12 and a half ESL specialists that serve our schools, and then 312 K through 6 ESL certified classroom teachers.
Just like to point out on there, you see at the top bullet says SCE, State Compensatory Education. That's a category of funding that's actually local funds that we have to assign to this bucket of state compensatory ed. It's actually local funds. That third bullet there, 22 bilingual teaching assistants, Title I and Title III, that's actually funding from federal sources. But what you'll see from looking at that is it's primarily the local funding sources that we have for our staffing, and makes sense when you look at the slide before it and we see how much money comes from local sources rather than state.
So our goals are to ensure English language learners master the state curriculum. So they're still responsible for all our TEKS and everything else that all the other students are. At the same time, develop their English proficiency, develop fluency and literacy for our dual language students in both English and Spanish. And we also want to develop an understanding and appreciation for other cultures. So the activities that we're required to do this is a big change, this first one in our identification. The new state ruling was that we have 4 weeks to identify students. And a lot of people say, well, that's more than what you used to have, because we used to have 20 school calendar days. But now we have 4 weeks. So of course, all of our teachers are stressing, what if someone registers on December 21st, the day before, we've already lost 2 weeks during the break. But we've been able to manage it so far, but this is the first year that this did go into effect, where we have 4 weeks from the day of enrollment. So it is a little change for us, but we've been able to accommodate all the students. Our assessment process is students will receive an oral language proficiency test to determine if they're limited English or not. We also use the ITBS, the TELPAS we use to monitor their progress, and I'll be sharing data on that, and the STAR, and I'll be sharing data on that as well. Our monitoring progress is ongoing, so every 6 weeks our teachers are checking the ESL student progress. Are they meeting, the TEKS? Are they learning? Are they passing? And if not, we are working with those students and those teachers to help those students achieve their goals. And then reclassification from the limited English proficient status to English proficient occurs when the students have met the criteria for the TELPAS and STAR. And that, even if they meet it early in the year, we cannot reclassify a student until May. So they're classified for the whole school year. Again, our instructional models, as I mentioned earlier, bilingual would be one way for our pre-K Head Start, and our two-way 50-50 program for K through 6. And then ESL, K through 6. ESL is basically content ESL, where all of our elementary teachers up through 6th grade are ESL certified, working with ESL students. And 7 through 12, it's a pull-out instructional model where their English teacher or the ESL specialist on that campus is working with those students. We do have an ESL summer school program that is required for our limited English proficient students going into kinder and 1st grade. So our current pre-K Head Start limited English proficient and our current kinder students will qualify to automatically attend ESL summer school. Parents have an option to accept that offer or not. On average, we're serving 210 students, so it's a good size program every summer for the month of June. We have 120 hours of instruction. It does not include, like, if they have recess, lunch, we have to take all that out. So it's truly 120 hours of instruction. We provide breakfast and lunch, transportation if the student lives more than 2 miles from wherever we have the program. And we typically rotate the program among the Title I schools, because then that helps with the meal program, with the summer meal program. So when we look at our data, our TELPAS composite ratings for K through 4, we had 422 students test in this area in 2018. We typically compare to the state, but we did not have composite state data. We still don't have it. We've been checking, and they haven't updated it yet. But for 2017 is the light blue for CSISD. 2018 is this last 2018 school year. We want to see the majority of our students in advanced and advanced high, because once they've reached advanced high, they're reaching fluency and they're reaching exit criteria from the LEP status. And that's our end goal, that all of these students become fluent English speakers. So we want the majority of our percentage to be up there. So we have 35% of our students that tested advanced in 2018 versus 25 in 2017. So our students are making progress. And then advanced high, we had 22% of our students that tested. And again, there were 422 students that tested in this category. Looking at 3rd through 12th, we had 584 students test in this category. And we have a little bit over half of them at the advanced, which is great to see, and then 24% of them at advanced high. So again, our goal is to move all of these students to advanced high as soon as they're ready. When we look at our ELLs, these are our English language learners. So this group of students is those who qualify under ESL, not bilingual ed. So this is ESL students. In third grade, we had, this is compared to the state, we had 66% of our third graders that passed the reading STAR test, 50% of our fifth graders that took the test, and 33% of our eighth graders. So this is just our English, our ESL students, not our bilingual education students. Then when we look at our bilingual, our percentages are higher, and if you could tell, the state percentages are also higher. This is all of our bilingual students in our program, so English limited and non-English limited. They take all the students and they rate them as bilingual education students. So we have 81% of our third graders passing and 83%. So we're a little bit above the state average.
This is the dual language program.
This is the dual language, yes, sir. So when we look at ESL, or our English language learners for math, third graders, we have 86% of our third graders passing, 82% of our fifth graders, and 67% of our eighth graders. So we're a little above the state average in all those areas.
Does this include all groups of children, talking about low SES and?
This is including all of our limited English proficient regardless of their socioeconomic, yes.
That's impressive.
Yeah, so, yes. And then for bilingual, we have 90% of our third graders passing the math, and then 86% of our fifth graders passing the math for bilingual.
We have some anomalies in our testing based on advanced math students.
Those don't really show up till about 7th grade.
Okay, so that's not going
No,
to
sir.
have an impact here.
No. And our data for bilingual, once the kids reach 7th grade, they're no longer bilingual class, like we don't label them bilingual anymore. They go from bilingual to ESL. So 3rd and 5th is a really good measure for how our bilingual students are doing. So when we look at our end of course exams, these are our English language learners. And for Algebra 1, we are at 71%. Biology, 67% of the students taking the biology test. And then in U.S. history, we have 50% of our students passing. So that is an area that we have addressed this year to work on. We're finding vocabulary, academic vocabulary. You combine reading and you combine the content and everything they have to know about U.S. history. One of the big things that the high school teachers, we've had conversations about this, a lot of the students taking this test are newcomers. They just got here and they're not exempt. Years ago, they would be exempt from taking one of these tests for 1 or 2 years. They no longer, they have to take the test. So it doesn't make a lot of sense.
In English?
Yes, ma'am. All of these tests are in English.
So they could come 2 weeks earlier and still have to take the test in English.
Exactly. The last opportunity they have the chance or the opportunity to take a test in a language other than English, which would be Spanish. That's the only other language, is 5th grade. So after 5th grade, students have to take all their assessments in English. So end of course for English, our English 1 students, we have 47% of the students taking English 1 passing, and we have 18% of our students taking English 2 passing. So, and they will continue to attempt to take these tests until they pass so that they can graduate high school. So,
And just a reminder, English 1 and English 2 have both a reading and a writing component to them.
that's a lot of information. Do y'all have any questions?
Again, this is no action, just to receive a report on this annual report. There's a lot of data, so we wanted to do it in this type of setting. Give you the opportunity to ask any questions you may have.
Questions? Well, thank you for the report, and thank you for identifying the issues. Some of those were easy to identify. But yeah, and it's certainly a difficult task, particularly when we know that kids could move in during that year, and that's their first year in the English-speaking world. And And we're going to give them a high school level test in English
And then U.S. history.
and U.S. history.
And most of them are not coming from,
Other parts
No.
of, they're not Louisiana.
right,
Sorry.
exactly.
It's a dig at Louisiana.
I'm really glad that you like pointed all that out because it is absurd.
Well,
Just saying.
yeah, it is. That's okay, though.
I couldn't go on saying that too.
Anyone else? I think that's it then.
Thank you, Dr. Ramirez.
Thank you.
And then with that, we are adjourned and we'll be back at 7.
Yes, sir.